Alright, so I'm sure you are all familiar with the weather balloon debunker go-to excuse. So we're going to kind of take a deep dive into that today and the origins of the weather balloon, swamp gas, etc. And look, this is fascinating stuff here. This is from within deep inside the Roswell report. Okay, so let's go back to 1995. The United States government gave an explanation to the Roswell crash, explaining it away as a weather balloon.
And these were not aliens, but dummies used in high-altitude ejection tests in the 50s. But the answers just triggered more questions, since the new pictures were mainly from the 50s and 60s, while the Roswell flying saucer reports occurred earlier in 1947.
Well, I'm afraid that's a problem that we have with time compression.
But even if observers were mistaken about dates, said Colonel
In 1947, the United States launched 32 mogul balloons. Over the course of 7 months, they were supposed to be a top-secret project in the growing Cold War against the Soviet Union. In fact, they said it was the mogul balloon number 4, that's really cool, I never knew that, number 4, that crashed near Roswell, and they knew this because the balloons were meticulously tracked and numbered. It was precisely 3 weeks after the number 4 mogul balloon was reported to be lost that we had the Roswell crash, July 2nd, 1947. So the Project Mogul balloon was reported to have been lost around the 12th of June. Each and every balloon was essentially a listening device equipped to detect the sound waves produced by a Soviet atomic bomb test. And at that time in our history, the U.S. was the only nuclear power in the world, really. I mean, there was rumors of others, but we were the only one. So if other countries were developing these types of weapons, the United States could hear the explosions during the test. That was the whole point of Mogul. The balloons were launched from the Alamogordo Air Base, just 70 miles from Roswell. That's a fun little word to say, Alamogordo. Although I've heard conflicting stories that the weather balloon was launched from New York. Okay, that's another rabbit hole we can go down later. So fast forward just a little bit. The Pentagon went on national TV and said it was the reflectors on these balloons that was misidentified as a UFO. It is absolutely laughable. Okay, a mogul balloon was a series of weather balloons linked together in a 650-foot high chain. You guys have seen the old black and white videos, I'm sure of this, okay? And I'm sure you guys are familiar with the famous Roswell picture of Jesse Marcel holding the debris inside General Ramey's office. But also keep in mind, Marcel would have absolutely known this debris was from a weather balloon. He was like the most well-versed person in the world, not the country, but the world. Considering he was in the 509th Bomb Division and was responsible for releasing and working with on a day-to-day basis these exact balloons, okay? It would be the equivalent of you working in a plastic tarp factory but not knowing what a plastic tarp is if you stumble across it in the desert. It is absolutely ridiculous, right? Okay, but then the argument from the government is that Project Mogul was a top secret program and only people in the Need to Know Club would have known about these particular balloons. But we've seen the balloons today. They look identical to the old balloons, so none of it makes sense, all right? Again, there was nothing special about them. In fact, there's still some in existence today in the museums. I even played a video of one of the actual mogul balloons on my Twitter feed or my X feed. The project's lead engineer was Professor Charles Moore of New York University. Okay, now this is where it gets kind of crazy. And guys, hang in here. This gets very interesting. He agreed with the government that the eyewitness descriptions of debris matched one of his balloons, and this was enough for the government to say, okay, cool, yeah, okay, I guess it was a weather balloon. That was it. If you guys are wondering where the government came up with the weather balloon cover story, it was from that particular professor. He just said, yeah, it's a weather balloon. It was based on an eyewitness story, okay? And again, his stamp of approval was based on this eyewitness testimony. He never actually saw the debris with his own 2 eyes. So the professor, or the professional eyewitness account concerning the materials of the downed UFO was given by a man that never even saw the damn debris. I mean, I cannot make this crap up. It was based off a description given to to him, through photographs and pictures, through this man, through that man, through this man. The government goes to him and he says, yep, that's definitely one of mine. And that's really how the story goes, according to the Roswell report. Okay, then they also said, Mac Brazel said there was islets found on the debris that were very similar to a weather balloon. And there has been absolutely no documents, no testimony, no nothing, no official report to back that statement up. And it's believed that he was coerced to make that type of statement. And that's if Mac Brazel made that islet statement at all. Again, that's the go-to debunker theory. It's a tarp. It has islets, the little metal circular things. And why was Mac Brazel held prisoner? Okay, and he was. This is an actual fact. He was held prisoner for 7 days by the United States military. Okay, and shortly after the incident, he became a very, very wealthy man. And according to the military officials, when the story broke about a crashed UFO at Roswell, Professor Charles Moore and his crew, okay, the people responsible for designing these mogul weather balloons, laughed about this and kept quiet because they knew all along it was just a weather balloon. Okay, this is according to the documents, right? Again, this is just complete nonsense. So basically, there's a professor that apparently agreed with the government about the weather balloon theory, but he also remains totally silent because he thought it was kind of cool, kind of funny. I mean, that's literally the story in the 95 Roswell report. Again, this sounds like a cover-up to me, because if you knew this was one of your balloons, right, and if you knew this was the lost number 4 weather balloon in particular, wouldn't you come forward and say so? Yes, absolutely, you would. And I think I'm going to play. I'm going to play a video of that exact balloon from Project Mogul, and you tell me if it looks like a flying saucer. It just doesn't add up. You would know what you're looking at. Okay. I mean, and look, this is just one piece of the cover-up. Now, the famous Jesse Marcel photo, July 8th, 1947, he was an intelligence officer, you guys know, and this was one of the biggest bait and switch or sleight of hand ever performed by the United States government. Once you dig into this, it is just shocking what they did to Marcel.
Everything, and had video to back it up. People who saw these saucer-like objects, it said, were actually looking at NASA space probes tested in New Mexico in the 1960s and 70s. These silvery devices, it said, were actually radar reflectors from a secret project in 1947. And these were not aliens, but dummies used in high-altitude ejection tests in the 50s. But the answers just triggered more questions, since the new pictures were mainly from the 50s and 60s, while the Roswell flying saucer reports occurred earlier in 1947.
Well, I'm afraid that's a problem that we have with time compression.
But even if observers were mistaken about dates, said Colonel Haynes,
it
was understandable that they got the wrong idea about what they saw.
They saw body bags come out because the dummies were put into body bags to protect them. And when you put all that stuff together and spin it, you find that it fits perfectly with many of the occurrences in Roswell during that era.
Okay, and this is where things just take an even crazier turn. Okay, again, they made Marcel the scapegoat, and it kind of reminded me of their fake mannequins falling out of the sky. Okay, remember, these alien bodies were recovered, but they said, oh, no, those are our, training mannequins. We drop mannequins out of planes with parachutes, and that's exactly what that is. But the only problem with that, okay, these types of crash test dummies, they didn't even exist until the late 1950s or even after, but that's for another day. So after the Roswell crash, and this is where it gets really crazy, okay, Colonel Blanchard ordered Major Marcel to fly to Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas. You guys know this. He had the debris. Okay, so Jesse Marcel gets in a plane, okay, immediately flies out to Dallas to the Army airfield to present the material from the downed UFO to Brigadier General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force commanding officer over the 509th Bombing Group. Okay, that's a long title, but that's what he was doing. And think about this, okay? Marcel thought I mean, just put yourself in his shoes. He thought he was flying to Fort Worth with pieces of a downed UFO with a flying saucer. Okay, so Marcel arrived in Fort Worth approximately 4 p.m. We know this to be a fact, okay? And actually, I actually analyzed that photo, but again, that's another video. So he gets there at 4 p.m. that afternoon, and he presented the materials to Ramey. Okay, and this is where the bait and switch took place. This is where the whole cover-up begins, or the major cover-up begins. Ramey takes Marcel to an adjacent map room just next door, and when he comes back into Ramey's office, that's where you see the iconic photo of Jesse Marcel with the weather balloon. Okay, so, I mean, guys, did you see what happened there? Someone switched out the flying saucer material for a damn weather balloon. Immediately after this, the Army calls for a press conference, and this is where the cover-up begins, or continues. I would say continues. Okay, they switched out the damn UFO debris for a weather balloon. Okay, imagine you walk next door with Ramey, right? You leave the debris on the desk. It's in a crate, it's in a box. You come back, the debris are gone, and in its place is a Project Mogul weather balloon. Wow, that is like a mic drop moment. And remember, Marcel was very familiar with weather balloons or spy balloons or acoustic sound devices equipped on these balloons, radar, whatever it was. This is what this man did for a living. Okay, he was an expert in this type of spy gear, because that's basically what it was. Now, Jesse Marcel had previously brought some of the crashed UFO debris to his family and woke them up at 2 a.m. in the morning because he was so excited about what he found. He would not have done this over a weather balloon, okay? He would have known it was a weather balloon and just went on about his business. Now, Jesse Marcel and everyone else involved was ordered to never speak about this again, okay? And the press, they just went along with it. Again, remember, the government got their story from Moore, the New York professor, based on an eyewitness account. Moore said, yep, sounds like a weather balloon. The government says, okay, weather balloon. They switch out the UFO with a weather balloon, and boom, take the picture. Fast forward 50-something years later, and here we are, okay? It was just crazy. Look, it was different. It was a different time back then. People looked at the government as the most trustworthy people on the planet, okay? And if they said it was a weather balloon, then damn it, it was a weather balloon. All right, now, 1980, Jesse Marcel came
and of course they were all told to keep quiet about
never
it.
Seen
Basically,
this material,
keep your mouth
was
shut,
not
or you're going to pay for it.
Now, according to Marcel, even General Roger Ramey knew this was a cover-up. Okay, but neither one of them could speak the truth about it because they would be severely punished. Okay. Also, it was reported that witnesses, including a nurse, saw alien bodies, and the official explanation put out by the United States government was that it was nothing more than test dummies being dropped out of the sky that, oh, by the way, didn't even exist in the 1940s, okay, or strapped into whatever aircraft. But the problem with that theory is, again, these test dummies didn't exist. The flying saucers that they blamed on NASA, they said it was satellites, didn't exist. So look, guys, just imagine that you have the Pentagon coming out in the 1990s claiming this was test dummies, basically mannequins, but they didn't even exist until nearly 10 years later in the mid-1950s when the Roswell crash happened in 1947. Okay, again, and when confronted, the government gave this explanation. Well, the people just had their dates and times confused because, of course, reporters back then, they did push back. They said, hey, Mr. Pentagon, this particular crash test dummies that you're describing in the report, they weren't even made till 10 years later. He's, well, you got your dates and times, you're just all mixed up. Be a better reporter. Do better is basically what they said. It literally makes no sense whatsoever because it seems like the government had their dates and times confused, not the reporters, not the people, not the researchers. So the problem with a lot of these older reports and stories is they did not ever plan on things like the internet existing or having an entire library at your fingertips just full of documents, pictures, videos, collaborations, and really intelligent people that could just easily uncover a cover-up. And so they arrogantly thought, hey, we'll just lie to them. They'll never know. And that's the origin story of the weather balloon excuse, okay, when it comes to UFOs. It was the number 4 Mogul balloon launched June 1947. So there you have it. Anytime you hear people say, it's probably swamp gas, probably a weather balloon, that's exactly what they're talking about. The number 4 Project Mogul weather balloon.